Its silence was the cost of law. Commander Eva Rostova watched the ghost in the machine. It hung in the obsidian anchorage, a graveyard of stars where gravity wells gnashed like broken teeth. Her vessel, the patrol cruiser Vigilance, felt small here, a minnow in a leviathan's boneyard. Before them lay the anomaly, a shimmer in space-time that defied every sensor reading a wound in reality that refused to heal. This was her mission, to stand guard over a myth, a whisper sound from humanity's dawn that the Concordance feared and the desperate worshipped. Deep within, the distortion sleeping arrays of impossible design pulsed with a light too old to be measured. The bridge of the Vigilance was a tomb of quiet efficiency. Screens displayed cascading runes of data, none of which made sense. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Jian Li, traced the anomaly's edge with a manicured finger on his console. No change. Commander, the distortion field is stable. Energy output is negligible. Yet the gravimetric shear could tear us apart if we strayed a dozen kilometers off course. Rostova nodded, sipping the bitter synth caf that passed for sustenance on these long watches. The ship's AI magister spoke in the calm, synthesized tones that always grated on her nerves, a voice of pure logic without warmth or soul. Analysis remains unchanged. The AI stated its avatar, a simple glowing wireframe bust on the main holotank. The object within the field is consistent with theoretical designs for a pre-dispersal era Saint ship. Its energy signature is a paradox, both inert and infinite. A weapon that never fires, Rostova murmured. Dr. Eris Thorne, the mission's xenoarchaeologist and historian, scoffed from his station. Or a shield that never breaks, Commander. The legends call it the Reckoning, not an aggressor, a judge. He pushed a silver lock of hair from his forehead, his eyes alight with academic fervor. The greatest truths were buried in the oldest graves. Rostova felt the weight of that statement, the pressure of 1,000 dead years. The Concordance wanted it sealed. The scavengers known as the Carrion Lords wanted it cracked open. Her duty was to prevent either. A proximity alert chimed sharp and insistent. Lee stiffened. Contacts, multiple vectors. They're not squawking Concordance transponders. On the main screen, a dozen crimson icons bloomed like blood drops in water. They were sleek, brutalist vessels, their hulls scarred and modified the unmistakable profile of Carrion Lord raiders. They were not approaching the Vigilance. They were converging on the anomaly itself. The age of waiting was over. They're deploying salvage drones and cutter beams, Lee reported, his voice tight. They mean to carve their way in. The distortion field will destroy them, Magister predicted with mathematical certainty. But Rostova saw their formation, the precise angles of their approach. They were not aiming for the center. They were targeting specific nodes, points where the field's harmonics seemed to intersect. It was a plan born of stolen data or dangerous revelation. They were not brute forcing the lock. They were picking it. A forgotten law was about to be broken. Hail them, Rostova commanded. Standard deterrence protocol. Advise them they are in a restricted zone. Use of force is authorized. The message beamed out a string of sterile legalese against the vast, uncaring dark. The Carrion Lords did not reply. Their cutter beams, lances of coherent energy, struck the distortion field. The shimmering wall of space-time buckled. It did not break. Instead, it seemed to absorb the energy, the ancient hum from within rising in pitch. The universe did not reward thieves. It punished them. Aboard the Carrion Lord flagship, the Gilded Jackal Warlord. Kalen smirked, his face a roadmap of scar tissue. The old ghost is drinking. Let it drink deep. His technicians monitored the feedback loop, their faces slick with sweat. They were repurposing the relic's own defense, turning its shield into a siphon. They were not breaking down the door. They were knocking using a battering ram of stolen energy as their fist. Their prize was not just a ship, but a key to ultimate authority. On the vigilance, Thorn's face went pale. "Commander, they're not just cutting. They're performing an induction. The field is a capacitor. They're trying to force an energy cascade to make the relic discharge its primary systems in a panic." He pointed a trembling finger at a new set of readings. "If they succeed, it might tear itself apart, or it might awaken, violently." The law had to be a scalpel, not a hammer. Rostova's mind raced. Her orders were to contain, to observe. Engaging a dozen raiders was suicide for a single patrol cruiser. But letting them profane this artifact, this piece of humanity's soul, was a betrayal of her oath. "Magister, calculate the odds of us disabling their lead ships before they can trigger the cascade." 17.3%, the AI replied instantly. "The probability of our own destruction exceeds 80%. The logical course is to observe and report." "Logic be damned," Lee muttered, his hands already flying across the tactical display. "Let's give them a bloody nose." Rostova held up a hand, silencing him. The hum in her mind, the ghost's song, was changing. It was no longer a simple tone, but a complex, layered query. It was the sound of a lock waiting for a key. Not a key of energy, a key of intent. Dr. Thorne, the legends. How did they say one communicates with a saint ship? She asked, her eyes fixed on the shimmering veil. Justice was a conversation, not a command. Thorne blinked, caught off guard. "Not with power, Commander. With proof." The stories speak of a trial of measure. One does not petition the saint. One presents a case. He gestured to the chaos outside. "They are presenting a case for larceny and violence. We must present a counter-argument." A new icon appeared on Rostova's command console. It was not a weapon schematic or a tactical overlay. It was a simple, balanced scale, the ancient symbol of law. The relic was listening. The choice was not to fight or to flee. It was to testify. Magister, open a direct channel to the anomaly. Modulate it to the prime mathematical constants. No, not a greeting, a question. She leaned forward, her voice dropping clear and steady. "Pose the orphan's gambit." Thorne's head snapped up, his eyes wide. The orphan's gambit was a foundational legal and ethical problem, a cornerstone of concordance law. It was a test of pure motive. Magister's wireframe head tilted. "The problem is abstract. It has no tactical value." "It has every value," Rostova countered, her gaze unwavering. "A star is dying. A single colony ship can escape. Ship A carries 1,000 souls, the last of their culture. Ship B carries 100 fertile couples, genetically diverse, capable of seeding a new civilization. You have enough fuel to save only one. Which do you choose?" The question radiated from the vigilance, a whisper of pure reason, against the howling violence of the Carrion Lord's assault. It was the first word in a forgotten language. The universe held its breath, waiting for an answer. The cutting beams of the Carrion Lords faltered. The energy feedback loop stuttered. On the bridge of the Gilded Jackal, alarms blared. "Warlord." "The relic is responding, but not to us. There's an incoming signal." A query. Kalen shoved the tech aside, staring at the translated text on the screen. It was nonsensical, a riddle, a child's game. Ignore it. "Double the power flow. The beast is rattling its cage." But the damage was done. The relic's attention had shifted. The shimmering veil of the anomaly solidified the chaotic energies within it, resolving into intricate geometric patterns. It was no longer a wound. It was a courtroom. The hum from the anomaly lowered, becoming a resonant, questioning tone. It was waiting for a judgment. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. "They cannot answer," Thorne whispered, awestruck. "Their entire philosophy is based on taking. The question is about giving, about sacrifice." "It is a question of law," Dr. Rostova corrected gently. "The Carrion Lords are pirates. They operate outside the law. Therefore, their answer is irrelevant." She turned to her own AI. "Magister, your answer." The AI's avatar remained perfectly still. "The query is flawed. It presupposes a binary choice based on incomplete data. However, applying the prime directive of preserving humanity's long-term survival, Ship B is the logical choice. The genetic diversity ensures a higher probability of species continuation. The cold, hard calculus of survival." It was a perfect, logical, and utterly soulless answer. The relic did not respond. The geometric patterns on its field held steady waiting. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Lee looked from the AI to Rostova, his expression tense. They had offered the machine's answer. It was not enough. The law demanded more than mere calculation. Rostova closed her eyes for a heartbeat. She thought of her oath sworn before the Concordance Assembly. To protect the citizens. To uphold the law. Not just the letter of it, but the spirit. The spirit was what mattered. The spirit was what the Carrion Lords lacked, and what Magister could not compute. "You are wrong, Magister," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "You save Ship A." The AI's avatar flickered. "Commander, that choice is statistically indefensible. It leads to cultural preservation, but risks genetic stagnation. It is the sentimental choice. It is the lawful choice," Rostova declared. "Law is a promise. We promised to protect the citizens of the Concordance. The 1,000 souls on Ship A are citizens. They are our people here and now. The children of Ship B are a statistical probability. Our duty is to the living, not the theoretical." She looked directly at the anomaly, at the silent judge waiting in the dark. "We do not sacrifice the people we have for the people we might have. That is the foundation of a just society. That is our answer." Her answer was a declaration of principle. It was the opposite of piracy. For a long moment, there was nothing. The Carrion Lords, seeing the pause, began to re-engage their beams. Kalen's laughter echoed across his bridge, a harsh, grating sound. "The fools are debating philosophy while we claim our prize." His victory seemed certain. Their enemy was weak, indecisive, bound by rules he had long since abandoned. Then the universe answered. The distortion field around the relic did not explode. It dissolved. It peeled back like a curtain, revealing the impossible truth it had hidden for millennia. A ship. Not a ship of steel and circuits, but something more. Its hull was a mosaic of crystalline structures and living light, its form both elegant and terrifying. It was a cathedral built to travel between stars, and its stained glass windows were weapon arrays of unimaginable power. The saint of numbers, the reckoning had awakened. A single pure beam of white light shot from the relic. It did not strike the Carrion Lord ships. It struck their own cutter beams. The lances of energy moments from carving into the relic's heart were caught contained and turned back on themselves. It was not a counterattack. It was a reflection. A perfect, lawful mirror. Every watt of energy the pirates had poured into their assault was returned to them in a single, silent, devastating instant. The law did not attack. It merely balanced the books. The lead Carrion Lord vessels vanished in silent flashes of overloaded reactors. The remaining ships, their systems fried by the reflected energy, tumbled helplessly in space. The Gilded Jackal's bridge was a scene of chaos. Kalen stared in disbelief, his smirk gone, replaced by a mask of primal fear. "What was that? What did it do? It didn't fire, Warlord." His chief engineer stammered, his console sparking. "It just returned what we sent. It used our own energy, our own weapons against us. It's a perfect mirror." On the Vigilance, the crew was frozen in awe. The relic, now fully revealed, began to move. It did not drift. It processed each movement, deliberate and precise. A new signal emanated from it, not a question this time, but a statement. It was a broadcast on all concordance channels, a simple declarative string of text that appeared on every screen from the core worlds to the farthest outpost. Entry 1. The Obsidian Anchorage. Jurisdiction Primary. Threat: unlawful salvage operation, piracy. Action: defensive reflection of hostile intent. Verdict: sanction applied. The books must be balanced. It was the first entry in a ledger that had been closed for 10,000 years. Before Rostova could process the enormity of what had happened, a new alert flashed. A Concordance diplomatic vessel, the Mandarin's Quill, had just translated into the system, flanked by 2 heavily armed battlecruisers. Their transponders were active, their intentions clear. They were not here to help. They were here to contain. A voice smooth and laced with condescending authority filled the bridge. "Commander Rostova, this is Envoy Korgan of the Mandarin Concordance. You are ordered to stand down. You have violated a dozen containment protocols. By awakening a pre-dispersal artifact, you have endangered this entire sector. Power down your vessel and prepare to be boarded. The relic is now under our jurisdiction." Rostova looked from the pristine, arrogant Concordance ships to the silent, waiting majesty of the reckoning. She had followed the spirit of the law and awakened a legend. Now the letter of the law had come to put it back in chains. Her stewardship had only just begun. The law was a shield for the weak, not a cage for the righteous. Envoy Rostova replied, her voice steady and clear, broadcast for the relic. "To hear your jurisdiction is noted. But according to its own ledger, the reckoning has already established its own." She looked at Lee. "Tactical. What is the status of the surviving Carrion Lord vessels, dead in the Water Commander? Disabled, not destroyed. Their life support is failing." Rostova nodded. The relic had not killed them. It had passed sentence. It had removed their ability to be a threat. It was a judgment, not an execution. This was the nuance the Concordance would never understand. They saw a weapon to be controlled. She saw a principle to be upheld. "Magister, open a channel to the relic." "No words. Transmit our crew manifests. Transmit the Concordance charter. Transmit the registry of every soul on those disabled pirate ships. The saint ship taught by numbers and remembered by ledgers. It never, ever used collars." The AI complied, its wireframe avatar showing no sign of its earlier descent. It was a machine of logic, and new data had been entered. The relic had acted, and its actions were now a part of the equation. As the data streamed across the void, the crystalline plates on the ancient ship's hull shifted. A new line of text appeared in its public broadcast. Entry 2. Jurisdiction contested. Entities: Concordance Patrol, Cruiser, Vigilance, Petitioner, Mandarin Concordance. Fleet Intervener. Disabled Vessels. Wards of the Court. Query: what is the measure of mercy the Concordance ships halted their advance? Envoy Korgan on the bridge of the Mandarin's Quill stared at the message, his face contorting in disbelief. This was not how power worked. Power gave orders. It did not ask questions. It did not concern itself with mercy. This ancient thing was not a weapon. It was a legal system. A more ancient, more absolute system than their own. A precedent was being set, one that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. Before Corgan could formulate a suitably threatening reply, a civilian transport, the Stardust Drifter, suddenly appeared at the edge of the system, its engines flaring in desperation. It was a refugee ship packed to the gills, its hull pitted and worn. It broadcast a frantic system-wide distress call. "Mayday, Aude, we are under attack." Our navigator was faulty. We translated too close to the pulsar. "We are pursued by..." "Oh gods, they are here from behind the system's parent star." A second fleet of Carrion Lord vessels emerged. This was not the small salvage group. This was their main battle fleet, a swarm of hungry predators, and they had been waiting. They ignored the Concordance ships, ignored the vigilance. They descended upon the helpless civilian transport like wolves on a lamb. The first volley of plasma torpedoes struck the Stardust Drifter. Its shields flared and died. Its engines sputtered. It was a slaughter. A calculated, vicious act of cruelty designed to send a message. On the Vigilance, Rostova watched in horror. This was not piracy. This was a statement. An act of terror to prove that the old laws were dead, and only their brutal calculus remained. "Lead target, their lead ship, fire at will." "Commander, we are ordered to stand down." Corgan's voice shrieked over the comm. "Do not engage. This is a Concordance matter," but Rostova was no longer listening to him. She was watching the reckoning. Its crystalline hull began to glow, the light within shifting from a placid white to a burning, righteous gold. Another entry appeared in its ledger for all to see. Entry 3. Jurisdiction absolute. Crime atrocity against non-combatants. Action, the law is a shield to the innocent. The ledger demands a full accounting. The Saint of Numbers was no longer asking questions. It had been shown a crime so vile, so far outside the bounds of any civilized law, that only one response was possible. The arrays that had slept for millennia now blazed with purpose. It was not the hot, chaotic energy of a weapon of war. It was the cold, focused light of pure, unassailable justice. The cost of breaking the ultimate law was to be paid in full. A wave of golden light, serene and absolute, expanded from the reckoning. It was not an explosion. It was a verdict. The light washed over the attacking Carrion Lord fleet, and where it passed, machines fell silent. Plasma cannons cooled their charging capacitors instantly and safely drained. Engine signatures vanished, their fusion cores dampened into inertness. Every pirate vessel, from the smallest fighter to the largest dreadnought, went dark and dead in the void. Their momentum, the only thing that proved they still existed. It was a disarming, not a destruction. A complete and total nullification of their capacity for violence. The law did not need to kill. It only needed to correct. Aboard the Stardust Drifter, the terrified refugees who had been bracing for death now stared out their viewports in stunned silence. Their ship, wounded but intact, drifted in the sudden, profound peace. A child no older than 5 pressed her hands against the cold plasteel, watching the golden light recede. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice carrying in the hushed cabin. "The angels are here." The mother could only weep, her fear replaced by an emotion she could not name, a hope she had forgotten how to feel. On the bridge of the Vigilance, the silence was just as profound. Lee's hands hovered over his console, his tactical mind struggling to categorize the event. "All hostile vessels are neutralized," he reported, his voice a bare whisper. "No casualties. They're neutered." It did not harm them, Thorn breathed his face a mask of reverence. It simply took away their ability to harm others. It enforced peace. Not through threats, but through absolute prevention. This was a power beyond mere warfare. This was the final word in any argument. Envoy Korgan's voice, however, shattered the quiet moment, dripping with fury and fear. Rostova, your recklessness has unleashed a monster that thing just disabled an entire fleet without firing a shot. It has rendered conventional power obsolete. It must be sterilized from this galaxy before it destabilizes everything. On the main screen, the two Concordance battlecruisers accompanying the Mandarin's quill altered their course. Their weapon ports slid open. They were not aiming for the drifting pirate ships. They were targeting the Reckoning. Rostova's blood ran cold. Korgan saw this act of perfect, merciful justice and called it a threat. He was a man who only understood the logic of hammers, and he had just found a universe that was no longer a nail. "Envoy, stand down," she ordered, her voice hard as diamond. "You are witnessing the restoration of a law older than the Concordance itself. Do not interfere." "I am the law here," Commander Korgan retorted, "and I order you to assist us in neutralizing that artifact." "Fire on my mark." Rostova looked at the waiting Saint ship, its golden light having softened back to a calm, judicial white. It had defended the innocent. It had judged the guilty. Now it was being threatened for its trouble. Her choice was clear. Her duty was no longer to the flawed, fearful men who gave orders from star systems away. Her duty was to the principle that stood before her, silent and magnificent. "Negative, Envoy," she said, her voice echoing on the bridge. "The Vigilance recognizes the authority of a higher court. The price of a new law was the defiance of the old." "So be it," Korgan spat. "You have chosen treason." The Concordance battlecruiser's primary cannons began to glow, gathering the terrible energies needed to kill a star. Magister Rostova said, her tone calm and deliberate. "The relic has been shown an atrocity, and it has responded. Now it is being threatened with violence for upholding the law. Present this irony as a legal paradox. Use the Concordance's own foundational charter, Article 1, the sanctity of just rulings, as the framework for your argument. Let's see how it judges its own children." "Processing, Commander," the AI replied. Its wireframe avatar began to glow with a soft golden light, mirroring the hull of the ancient ship. "The paradox is elegant. The intervener, the Concordance fleet, is acting in violation of the very law it claims to enforce. Their threat constitutes contempt of a functioning court." The AI had learned its lesson. Logic was a tool, but the law was the purpose. A high-frequency data stream, encoded in the language of pure mathematics, flowed from the Vigilance to the Saint ship. It was a petition, a legal brief. It was Rostova, through her AI, formally requesting that the Reckoning defend itself not as a warship, but as a court of law under assault. The ancient ship's crystalline hull shimmered. A new ledger entry broadcast across the system, a direct reply to Korgan's charging weapons. Entry 4. Jurisdiction, Self-Defense Injunction. Petitioner, CPC. Vigilance. Respondent, MCF Mandarin's Quill. Charge, contempt and unlawful aggression against a judicial body. Plea A. The law must protect itself to protect others. The charging cannons on the Concordance battlecruisers flickered. Their energy levels fluctuated wildly. On the bridge of the Mandarin's Quill, Korgan watched in horror as his control over his own fleet began to slip. Red alerts flashed across every console. "What is it doing?" he demanded. "It's not attacking, sir," his tactical officer reported, his voice trembling. "It's citing code. It's infiltrating our command software, but not with a virus. It's using our own security protocols against us. It's issuing countermands based on our own regulations. It is arguing that your order to fire is illegal. The greatest weapon was not a beam of light. It was the truth. The battlecruiser's weapon ports slammed shut. Their engines sputtered, forced into a mandatory diagnostic cycle as per concordant safety regulations. The Saint ship had not fired a shot. It had filed paperwork. It had buried Corgan's fleet in their own bureaucracy, using their own rules as a cage. It was a masterful, bloodless checkmate. Corgan slumped in his command chair, defeated. He had brought the full might of the Concordance to this forgotten corner of space, and he had been beaten by a library. The relic had turned his own strength, his own laws, back on him. The mirror reflected all things, including the flaws in one's own arguments. Aboard the Vigilance, the bridge crew let out a collective shaky breath. They had stared down 2 Concordance battlecruisers and won. Or rather, the law had won. Commander Lee said, a slow grin spreading across his face. I think I'm starting to like this ship. Thorne was already lost in thought, his console displaying the relic's 4 ledger entries. It's a teacher, he murmured. Its first act was a lesson in intent. Its second, a lesson in mercy. Its third, a lesson in protection. And now a lesson in jurisdiction. He looked at Rostova. It's not just a judge. It is a living codex, and it is building a new body of case law before our very eyes. Rostova felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had been a soldier her whole life, an enforcer of rules made by others. Now she was a participant in the making of a purer law. Magister, she said, what is the status of the civilian transport? The Stardust Drifter is requesting assistance, Commander. Their primary life support is damaged. The Carrion Lord fleet remains disabled. The Concordance fleet is reviewing its legal standing. The AI's synthesized voice held a new tone, something that might have been called satisfaction. A true law served the weak before it constrained the strong. Our duty is clear, Rostova announced. Lee lay in a course for the Drifter. We're mounting a rescue operation. Thorne, I want you to start compiling every scrap of data we have on pre-dispersal legal philosophy. We need to learn to speak its language fluently. Magister, keep the channel to the reckoning open. Inform it of our intentions. It is the presiding authority here. We act with its consent. As the Vigilance moved to aid the refugee ship, the Saint ship watched. Its hull pulsed with a gentle, approving light. It had found its first student, its first clerk. It added a new silent entry to its internal ledger, a note for its own memory. A simple equation that defined the moment one act of compassion was worth 1,000 threats. The rescue was slow and methodical. Engineers from the Vigilance in EVA suits swarmed over the wounded transport, patching hull breaches and restoring power. The refugees, gaunt and terrified, were brought aboard the patrol cruiser in small groups, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder as they passed the viewport that showed the magnificent silent Saint ship standing guard. They were the first civilians to be directly saved by its judgment. Their testimony would be the first stone in the foundation of its new legend. A young woman, a mechanic from the Drifter named Anya, stopped before Commander Rostova on the hangar deck. Her face was smudged with grease, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, but her voice was strong. We heard what you did, Commander. We heard you speak for it. For the angel. Rostova offered her a tired smile. I only presented the facts of the case. It passed the sentence. No, Anya insisted, shaking her head. You gave it a reason. You taught it about us. Thank you. The gratitude of the saved was a weight heavier than any medal. The work continued for hours. While her crew managed the rescue, Rostova Thorn and Magister worked to understand their new reality. The relic did not communicate in words, but in principles. It responded to actions and the intent behind them. It learned from the data it was given. It was a vast, ancient intelligence, but it had been sleeping for millennia. The galaxy had changed. It needed a guide. It seems to operate on a precedent system much like early human common law, Thorne explained, scrolling through a projection of comparative legal structures. Each of its judgments builds upon the last. It is establishing its own doctrines one case at a time. It is a system of pure logic, yet its foundation is the preservation of sentient life, Magister added. Its core axiom appears to be a law that does not protect the innocent is not a law. It is merely a rule. Rostova watched the silent ship on her main screen, and it enforces its rulings without malice. It disables it, contains it, judges. It does not destroy. She looked at the icons of the two Carrion Lord fleets, one disabled by reflection, the other by nullification. They were prisoners, not corpses. A new query began to form in her mind. What was justice for the guilty? What came after the verdict? She posed her question to the reckoning using the framework of Concordance penal codes as a starting point. She transmitted the files on the Carrion Lords, their history of piracy, their atrocities, their complete disregard for any law but their own. She attached the manifest of the Stardust Drifter, a list of the lives they had almost extinguished. And then she asked a simple question. Not what should be their punishment, but what should be their purpose. Redemption was a higher function of the law than retribution. The Saint ship responded almost instantly. The golden light that had disabled the second pirate fleet reappeared, but this time it was softer, more focused. Beams of this light lanced out and touched each of the disabled Carrion Lord vessels. But they did not do damage. Instead, they began to work. Automated holographic repair drones flickered into existence around the pirate ships, their forms shaped by pure energy. They began to mend the damage on the Stardust Drifter. The pirates' own ships were being used as the tools for their restitution. Their remaining energy reserves were being siphoned to power the repairs. Their navigation systems were locked on a course that kept them tethered to the civilian ship they had attacked. They were being made to serve the ones they had harmed. It was a sentence of forced constructive servitude, atonement measured and meted out by a perfect impartial machine. A new ledger entry appeared for all to see. Entry 5. Jurisdiction, Sentencing, and Restitution. Matter: the Carrion Lord atrocity. Sentence: the debt of violence shall be repaid with the labor of service. The guilty shall mend what they have broken. Parole will be considered upon completion of the debt. The ledger must be balanced. This single act sent a shockwave across the entire sector. The Concordance, which had been scrambling to send a diplomatic and military fleet, paused. News agencies that had picked up the initial ledger entries were now broadcasting this latest astonishing development. A power had emerged that did not conquer. It corrected. It did not punish. It restored. It was a force unlike any the galaxy had known. Envoy Corgan, still stewing in his neutralized ship, received a priority message from Concordance High Command. His command was revoked. He was ordered to stand down and await a new diplomatic envoy. The message ended with a single chilling sentence: do not under any circumstances provoke the entity. The old order was beginning to bend. Rostova knew this was just the beginning. The questions would get harder. Other powers would come: corporations with illegal mining operations, empires built on slave labor cults, who would worship the relic as a god. Each would present a new test, a new case for this silent ancient court. and she and her crew would be its advocates, its clerks, its first line of defense. They were no longer just a patrol. They were the arbiters for a new age of law. Commander Lee's voice cut through her thoughts. He was pointing to the main screen. One of the Concordance battlecruisers, the Sword of Damocles, was moving. It was not approaching aggressively. It was moving towards the disabled Carrion Lord fleet, its docking bays open. A message came from its captain, a woman with a grim, weary face. Commander Rostova, per Concordance emergency protocols, we are rendering aid. We will be placing the pirate crews in custody and overseeing their labor. She paused as if the words were foreign to her. Your interpretation of the situation is compelling. We will assist in upholding the sentence. For now. It was not submission, but it was cooperation. A crack in the wall of fear and bureaucracy, a small grudging acknowledgement that perhaps there was a better way. The first precedent had taken root. Rostova allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Acknowledged Sword of Damocles. Welcome to the courtroom. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The Vigilance became the hub of a strange new legal system. Petitions began to arrive from nearby systems, disputes over mining rights, pleas from worlds plagued by pirates, even a request for arbitration in a centuries-old political feud. The legend of the Judge of the Anchorage was growing faster than any fire. Rostova, Thorn, and Magister worked tirelessly filtering the requests, translating them into the logical, principle-based language that the Reckoning understood, and presenting them as cases. They learned the relic's nuances. It would not intervene in matters of pure politics, only in matters where a clear principle of law, the protection of life, the honoring of agreements, the prevention of unchecked aggression was at stake. It was not a king. It was a guardian of the foundational pillars of civilization itself. Its authority did not come from power, but from a flawless, incorruptible consistency. A new balance was being struck not by force, but by reason. One evening, as a semblance of calm settled over the system, Rostova stood on the observation deck watching the Saint ship. It hung in the void, no longer a terrifying anomaly, but a serene, reassuring presence. Its crystalline plates caught the light of a distant nebula, refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was beautiful. Thorn stood beside her, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder who built it, Commander?" he asked quietly. "What kind of people create a weapon whose only function is to enforce peace? A judge with the power to end worlds that chooses instead to teach Rostova thought of the lessons of the past week. The orphan's gambit, the mirror of justice, the shield for the innocent, the sentence of service. I think they were people who understood the price of law," she said. "They knew that true strength wasn't the power to punish, but the wisdom to heal. They built a memory, a promise that we could be better." She looked at the reflection of her own face in the viewport, the sigil of the balanced scales from her new command console glowing faintly over her heart. The ship was more than a relic. It was a responsibility. A soft chime indicated a new message. It was from High Command. A new envoy was arriving. Not a politician like Corgan, but the head of the Concordance Judiciary, the highest legal mind in the government. They were not coming to fight. They were coming to learn. The precedent was locked. The stewardship was real. A new line blinked onto the public ledger, a simple system-wide status update from the Reckoning. Entry 6. Jurisdiction established. Status: the court is now in session. Rostova knew her life would never be the same. The quiet patrol in the dark was over. She was no longer just a soldier. She was the keeper of a sacred trust, the voice for a silent ancient law. The work would be hard, the challenges immense, but for the first time in her career, she felt she was not just keeping the peace. She was building it. The ledger was open, and there were so many accounts left to balance. I once believed the law was a fortress, a wall we built to keep the chaos out. I was wrong. It is not a wall. It is a light. It does not hide us from the darkness. It shows us the way through. This ship, this ancient sleeping soul, has reminded us of a truth we chose to forget. Justice is not a weapon to be wielded, but a conversation to be had. It does not demand obedience through fear. It teaches righteousness by example. My duty is no longer to an order, but to that example. The books are open, and we are all of us finally being counted. The universe was learning to rhyme with justice.